Program objectives should be clearly stated, measurable, meaningful, and include a performance criterion so that program learning outcomes may follow that continuum or a thread according to said goals. Today we have Dr. Georgia to address designing program objectives and program learning outcomes.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really excited to welcome you to the very first World Higher Education Summit. And today we're joined by leaders in their field, leaders in higher education, by incredible Dr. Georgia and Dr. Fadoua. And it's a great pleasure to have you here. Today's topic is really crucial for everyone in higher education: designing program objectives and outcomes, cross-cultural adaptation, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and global education. It's a great privilege for me to have panelists like Dr. Georgia and Dr. Fadoua for today. And let me tell you a little bit about our panelists. So Dr. Georgia Bedford is a visiting lecturer at the University of Pittsburgh with years of teaching experience for top-ranking universities throughout the greater Pittsburgh area. Her professional repertoire includes providing instruction in arguments, civil discourse, media literacy, business professional communication, and public speaking, and many other. Dr. Georgia has been positioned as student advisor, student mentor, member of assessment, and curriculum committee. What is more, Dr. Bedford's research continues from her dissertation dealing on contemporary issues and problems associated with curriculum assessment, access, equality, and equity. It's a great pleasure to have you here today, Dr. Georgia. Where are you joining us from?
I am in the United States, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Excellent. And I'm really honored to be joined by Dr. Fadoua Loudiy, an assistant professor in the Department of Strategic Communication and Media. She's the co-director of the Middle East Studies Center, and she actively contributes to developing programs on global learning and diversity, equality, and inclusion. Dr. Loudiy is the second vice president-elect of the Pennsylvania Communication Association, and she has published several journal articles and book chapters on communication ethics and transitional justice. And she's the author of Transitional Justice and Human Rights in Morocco. It's a great pleasure to have you here. Where are you joining us from?
Thank you for having me. I'm also in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Excellent. Well, some greatest minds are there, and it's really a great pleasure to interview you today, because today's topic is vital for not only for higher education institutions, but also for schools, because today we are going to talk about the learning outcomes, designing program objectives in cross-cultural dimension. And I would like Professor Georgia, if you could kindly share your screen. I know that you have prepared a presentation that you would like to share with our audience.
Absolutely.
Excellent, thank you.
Everyone see that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, my portion of the presentation is going to discuss cross-cultural adaptation as it pertains to mental health. Now, cultural adaptation is something we all have to deal with when we make a move from one place to another for any extended period of time. And we know that higher education is increasingly becoming aware that we're dealing with a mental health epidemic among our students. What we may not think about as an important area of examination is the fact that among the major contributors to poor states of mental health in higher education is the cultural transition process. Transitions can lead to heightened stress, anxiety, and depression. If we understand this process better, we can develop adaptive strategies designed to target points of transition so that we can move students more smoothly and quickly to the recovery and adjustment phase of this process. And we can do that by addressing transitions programmatically through designing objectives and outcomes. So one of the first things that we want to address, just in terms of a basic understanding, is what culture is and why it is an important consideration to build into our programmatic objectives and outcomes. First of all, it is embodied in the person. Nolan defines culture as a pattern of meaning, a way of defining the world and living in it, the rules for which rules are deeply internalized in individuals. And in some very important aspects, different cultures create different worlds. In fact, in a study examining psychological responses to environmental shocks, Quinlan et al. States that human thought itself is cultural. Human thought is comprised of, quote, familiar and shared ways of thinking, to which an individual has grown accustomed in part because they have been exposed to a culture for extended periods of time, unquote. These ways of thinking provide people with reliable mental modes for action that inform predictable outcomes inferred through regular interactions with people and environment in patterned practices. So we know that there are two critical points where students experience disruptions to their known ways of thinking and practices and behaviors, and they also experience heightened anxiety specifically as a result of these cultural transitions. The first is from secondary to post-secondary education, and on the other side, the transition from program completion to the workplace. Mortos argues that program objectives should be written on the other side of the process. We make assumptions. We assume the students have difficulty transitioning when they come from the secondary experience, but we may not be thinking about the career side of it. So Mortos says the career and professional accomplishments of graduates during the first several years of graduation should be built within program objectives. And this may be limited, however, to the level of concepts and contemporary skills according to the respective industry. So we know that in terms of program objectives and outcomes, we can only speak of them in general terms because they are designed across three primary levels, beginning with the university mission, the respective college or school, at the departmental level, and then further once a student declares a concentration or a track. So what types of courses, theories, practicums, experiential and programmatic considerations are all determined at those levels. And we also understand there to be three types of learning objectives. Cognitive, what do we want our graduates to know? Affective, what do we want our graduates to think about and care about? And behavioral, what do we want our graduates to be able to do? Ideally, consideration should be given to cultural competence, diversity, equity, and inclusion across all three objectives, as well as at the level of outcomes. Program outcomes, on the other hand, are met incrementally, primarily through coursework, where students gain knowledge and skills that cumulatively should progress toward the completion of a program. Outcomes are achieved results, and the student typically demonstrates what they have learned evidentially through assessments and in other ways at the classroom level. So this is the way learning is assumed to be demonstrated. So the problem is that students tend to underperform early in their program, and they may even experience difficulty when they move into core courses of concentration for their disciplinary, track. But they also experience difficulties in transition in their early professional life. So we know that these transitions cause students to experience heightened levels of stress, anxiety, and depression. What are these phases of cultural adaptation? There are four primary phases. Phase one is the honeymoon phase. Phase two is the crisis phase. Phase three is recovery, and phase four is adjustment. So when a student first arrives either to campus or on the other side in a new workplace, they are initially going to experience most likely positive feelings of excitement and optimism coming into a new experience. And also the same factor comes into play when they go into the shock phase. At this point, they're realizing, yes, I'm actually in a new environment. The expectations, the practices, the processes, demands are heightened, very different from either the secondary school experience or at the end of a program. Academia is very different from professional life. So at this point, they can begin to experience things like sadness, irritability, anxiety, depression. They can even experience changes in their eating and sleeping habits. And so the goal is to get them beyond this point toward recovery and adjustment more quickly. And we understand and assume that recovery, takes time and patience, but we also have to build in opportunities for social networking and familiarization with systems, practices, and processes so that students can begin to feel a reduction in their stress and have, increased levels of comfort. Ideally, we want to get them to the adjustment phase before they leave their first year, and certainly give them opportunities for them to move more quickly into that phase once they reach professional life. And in adjustment, this is where they are experiencing more self-confidence, become familiar with the new environment. So we understand and assume that this is the case for international students. And I'm going to take a look alternately at two different models, the international model and then a model that applies more domestically. So the world of higher education is very different from secondary school, from the philosophy of education to pedagogy. It's vastly different academically to operate in academia and be in the world of business. And so the strategies on either end of this are going to be different. But in terms of building in program objectives and outcomes, on either end of that programmatically, departments, well, at the university level, there are basics that can be addressed. And then on the other side of that programmatically, departments and disciplinary communities can do a better job professionally. But when people shift from one culture to another, there's a feeling of chaos because what is happening, they're attempting to apply old cultural rules to the new environment. And the response is that they're either going to do something incorrectly, or just the unfamiliar nature of the new environment is going to, result in what Hofstede calls a culture rate of stress. This actually comes from the work of Barry and Annis, anthropologists, back in 1974 as a response to the cultural shock phase, where people actually, we compare one culture and the movement to another as a movement to an alien cultural environment. So we know that culture shock tends to be difficult for international students because when they arrive to a foreign country, everything is new and different. And while they may feel excitement initially, they're likely to go into the shock phase just for many, many reasons, but the transition itself, the exposure, they're going to experience all those symptoms. They will also hopefully be able to adapt through many different supports international offices provide. And, international offices are there for that purpose, but at the university departmental levels, we need to figure out, are those needs being addressed? We also know that when they go back home for any extended period of time, they're going to go back through that process as they attempt to reintegrate into their own culture. And that process is in fact cyclical, because then when they come back to study, in the country where their program is located, they're going to go back through that process all over again. But we may not think about this adjustment in terms of what happens to domestic students. Domestic students, we think that they know how to be a student and they know what the expectations and demands are for being a student. But what we don't consider is that there is a lot of handholding that goes on with in secondary school. And I've had many students come to me and say, just tell me what to do. I don't know what to do, or I don't understand how to use the systems. and they are in their sophomore years. So we can help guide them by understanding different phases of adaptation in terms of acculturation and enculturation. So if we look at them a little bit more closely, we can develop strategies that we can integrate throughout these processes. And I just want to explain a little bit. Acculturation is a process. It's not a unitary event. It's not assimilation where we are asking someone to exclude their history, their values, their beliefs, or what we might think of as a cultural subtraction, because this can happen when we ask a person to remove their self-identity or adopt identity projections of the dominant culture. There is an adjustment that does take place, however. There is an identity shift in terms of what it means to be a student. And it certainly is on the other side, the difference between being a student and being a professional. This is in part an identity shift. But acculturation strategies can be developed based upon understanding what it is. So the Social Science Research Council defines acculturation as a culture change that is initiated by the conjunction of two or more autonomous cultural systems through cross-cultural interactions between groups or a contact situation. Citing Thirnwall, Teske Nelson argue that acculturation in this sense is a process of adaptation to new conditions. And then Gillen and Ramey refer to processes whereby the culture of a society, one society may have to be modified as a result with a different society or culture. And there is disagreement among scholars as to the extent to which acculturation is individualized or occurring primarily through contact between groups as a dynamic interplay, or in other words, is it unidirectional where the dominant culture of academia, in this case, flows down to the student? We would hope not. But it is, we do understand it to be a psychological process. It is both at the individual and the group level. To which extent depends primarily on the level of analysis and the situation. But we can say that as a principal condition of acculturation, as a dynamic process, through continuous contact with the normative structures of the dominant culture, through systems, exposure to supports and services and information, a first-year student in this case would by necessity have to adapt and or modify certain habits and ways and practices, but through information and other strategies, hopefully we shorten that process and make it less stressful. And then of course with, in terms of building in programmatic objectives and outcomes, addressing transition has to take place on both sides. So students can become enculturated to the environment by incorporating guided participation in cultural practices. What are some things that we do on campus? What are events that we celebrate, and things like games, and finding ways to include students and learn from students. Ideally, it should be a reciprocal process. So during the process, learners, hopefully on both sides, develop participatory knowledge about each other and develop new skills, and grow to be constructive and understanding individuals that can interact with each other through both communities. And so some suggestions, just generally speaking, because as I said, it's too broad of a topic to cover every possible opportunity. From secondary to post-secondary education, basic skills in research and academic integrity. This is something we run into all the time. And in fact, students often learn some of these things incorrectly. Basic introductions to technology and learning management systems. I've had students tell me they have no idea how to use the learning management system 2 years into their academic life. Introduction to supportive services and whatever supports are available for students. And in fact, if we need to add to that base of services, and through mentoring programs. And on the other side, certainly disciplinary communities are going to be better at identifying strategies. But in the post-secondary to professional transition, bringing in guest speakers, having guest speaker series, even guests in the classroom, explaining to students on a disciplinary level what the expectations are, what it means to be a professional within a discipline, internships. Not everyone can do internships, but we should be trying to find ways to move students from the crisis point to adjustment. And that concludes my portion. I will pass this on to Dr. Loudiy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Georgia. It is really amazing how you actually talked about all those different phases and process of cultural adaptation from honeymoon phase to crisis recovery and adjustment. And it's really interesting to see how from 1974, from initial cultural shock, there still has been done some progress. However, there are still challenges that are there and students across the world still in 2022, they face those challenges. And thank you so much for contributing to countering those challenges and helping students actually overcome this. And to you, Dr. Fadoua, I know that you have a lot to contribute to today's discussion. I'm really looking forward to your input here.
Thank you. I do have a couple of slides. Am I able to share my screen? Because I think it's really important to talk a little bit about my background and how that has influenced my perspective. So I'm going to be talking about what a cosmopolitan ethic is in our understanding of global learning. And I will start by talking a little bit about myself. I am a native of Morocco. I've been expatriate in the United States for 20 years. I speak Arabic, French, some Spanish, and obviously English. And I do view my culture as hybrid and something that's very dynamic and constantly changing, as well as my identity. I have been teaching intercultural communication and other courses from a global and international perspective for 20 years. And I have recently designed a certificate in global and intercultural communication. It's an undergraduate certificate at Slippery Rock University. I have worked as a freelance interpreter, translator, and language trainer and facilitator for many years. I also work with refugees here in Pittsburgh, and I have adopted, not perhaps consciously, but as a way of just circumstances, cosmopolitanism as a way of thinking and living. So the way I came to this is through facilitating a seminar for a learning community at Slippery Rock University, and I'm borrowing here the learning outcome for Slippery Rock University about global learning, which is defined as developing a worldview that acknowledges diversity and global interdependence. And that has 3 outcomes. So understanding the importance of diverse experiences, cultures, and identities, understanding the way that groups and individuals and interaction impact self and society, and then applying multiple perspectives to address local, regional, global, and cultural issues. And this is, I want to emphasize that this is not, this particular outcome is not simply to try to embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion and global learning to pay lip service to these issues, but it is a necessity in this day and age. And as we have seen with the impact of COVID and also with the recent war in Ukraine, we have become so interconnected financially, in terms of our cultures, in terms of our social media. So the world has really kind of shrunk, and that is emphasized more during times of crisis, like the health crisis that COVID has created in the world. So this particular learning outcome has led to 3 learning objectives. The first one is to expand fields of experience and knowledge to include worlds outside of one's own. So discovering new cultures, new ways of being, new languages, new foods even, because we don't think necessarily of food as something that can be learned in educational context, but it is. The second one is to make commitment to learning about the world, the rest of the world, and oneself, which is also very, very important when we think about global learning. And the last one is to infuse that knowledge, so that knowledge is gained outside and inside of the classroom, but to infuse that knowledge and understanding into the classroom and the pedagogy, so that professors and instructors are able to share that with the student, and even to frame and develop their pedagogy with these learning objectives in mind. So what I would like to spend a couple of minutes on is this idea of cosmopolitan education, because oftentimes we hear about globalization, global learning, and I take issue with this idea of global learning because it is a concept that has affinity with globalization. And globalization is a capitalist movement. It is a movement to share product, to sell products, and to make money out of cultures, to make cultures subservient to a capitalist agenda. Whereas cosmopolitanism as an ideal and as a philosophy is a perspective that starts with looking at the world as cosmos, and as individuals, we are part of all of us, no matter where we are in terms of our geographic location, Pittsburgh or elsewhere, we are all connected to this whole that is the cosmos. And so this idea of cosmopolitan education starts from within. First is this grounding and understanding of one's culture before we're able to understand other people's culture. And one of the kind of fascinating things that happened in my classroom with my student is when we talk about culture, their understanding of culture, and I think Dr. Georgia did a really wonderful presentation on defining culture, but my students think of culture as something exotic, quote unquote. It's not something that they have, it's always other. And it's very important to help them define, understand, and appreciate their own culture, where they come from, because it is very hard to try to understand someone else if we don't understand ourselves. And also this idea of situating ourselves, both in our own societies and in our own culture, but also on a global and bigger scale. So it's like the micro and the macro, you know, what's happening locally and what's happening globally. And also with this comes a desire to understand about people in Ukraine, people in Afghanistan, people in Syria. So to develop that curiosity that there is a shared humanity to all of us, no matter where people live, and that this difference that people bring to the table nurtures our own culture, nurtures our own soul. The fourth aspect is to develop cultural humility, because oftentimes, and this is something I hear quite often, my students say is that they think American culture is the best culture in the world, and that ethnocentric perspective is not unique to Americans or to my American students, but it's this understanding that one, it is normal to feel that way about one's culture, especially if the only one that one knows, but also that all cultures feel the same way. If you feel special about your culture, all other cultures feel the same way. And the last aspect is to develop this cosmopolitan ethic to global learning. And I have three coordinates that I refer to when I think about this cosmopolitan ethic. And it's a bit of a summary of what I just shared. The first one is self-reflection and grounding. And it's this understanding of where are we speaking from? That is so, so important. The second one is this idea of seeking unity. And this goes back to the idea of the cosmos. So the cosmos is this big entity that is whole, and we're parts of that big entity. So the recognition that we are part of a whole, and that in our learning about others, we are trying to become whole again, that we're no longer parts, but we're seeking wholeness and unity. And the third one is this a priori recognition of otherness, that we're always other to someone. We're always a stranger to another person or another culture. So these are some of my thoughts on cosmopolitan education. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fadoua, because this is really eye-opening experience for many of our audience, because you were talking about prioritization of opening up to global perspective and seeing everyone as a whole. And this is a very holistic approach to the current challenge that most universities across the globe face this. And for our audience in higher education, this is a great reminder about the importance of those cultural curiosity and openness and intuitive acceptance of otherness. And today we see that humanity has actually united, and we can see this in many areas of the world. And I believe that what you are saying is actually happening right now. And thank you so much for a brilliant presentation, Dr. Fadoua, Dr. Georgia. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you, and it's been a great honor to know you, because you're doing some amazing things to promote unity across the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.